Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be back. You get awfully lazy recovering from surgery, I tell you. So, talking about resilience and fragility today, mainly about resilience. When our ethical relationships are violated, we feel pain, we suffer. Often good people, and what I mean by saying good people, are people who care about the world, who care about other people, and want to try to make the world a better place. Often look at their own suffering as evidence that there's something that they did wrong. They may ask, what else could I have done? Why didn't things work out? They can almost give up at times. And I think sometimes looking at the world today, I feel like that at times, like I should give up. But if you care deeply about your family, if you have compassion for other people, if you have causes you care about, things are going to clash. Your loyalties are going to be strained. You're going to confront challenges. And you're going to suffer tragedies. You can be hurt in a world that can be capricious and cruel. But suffering is not a sign that there's something wrong with you. It's usually a sign that you care and your eyes are open. So to many of you currently suffering from our cruel and capricious world, I want to explore not just fragility, but particularly resilience today. I'm going to explore resilience as it arises in the personal world, and then briefly at the end try to apply some of the lessons drawn from there to our current political challenges. Can we, both as people, as friends, and as citizens, renew our faith in our ability to overcome setbacks? Because we're going to have to be resilient in the next few years. I'm going to start by looking at heroic resilience. Last year I read Laura Hillebrand's book, Unbroken, a World War II story of survival, resilience, and redemption. Maybe some of you have read it or seen the film called Unbroken about Louis Zamperini, who was a prospect for an Olympic gold medal in distance running when he was drafted into World War II. His plane was shot down in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. He survived shark attacks. He was strafed by Japanese planes with two of his colleagues in the raft. And he was driven mad by dehydration and starvation in an almost unimaginable 47 days at sea. That was the easy part. He was then picked up by a Japanese boat and imprisoned in a series of ever more brutal concentration camps. And because he was a U.S. sort of star in athletics, he was targeted by a cruel and psychotic guard determined to break his spirit. Just reading the book required me to be resilient. While I hope I'll never find out, I don't think I could survive a tenth of what Zamperini went through. But maybe the twisted world of war is not the best way to look at resilience in a way that we can all understand, normal folks like you and I, comfortable folk who don't have to be placed in that horrible position. So I'm going to look at the author of Unbroken, Laura Hillebrand, who also wrote the book Seabiscuit. When she was an undergraduate at Kenyon College, she fell ill and they didn't know what it was until eventually, a few months later, the doctors found out she had chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, that created a lot of anxieties, and her family and friends didn't give her a lot of sympathy. Some even felt like she was just being lazy because it was not a syndrome well known. But she said that comparing what you and I feel as fatigue to what she went through was like comparing a match to an atom bomb. So on top of this crippling physical condition, she felt ostracized. And she went into writing as a way to escape. She said, quote, "I'm looking for a way out of here. I can't leave it physically. So I'm going to have to do it intellectually. It's just fantastic to be alongside Louis as he's breaking the NCAA mile record. People with these vigorous moments in their lives, it's my way of living vicariously." And she noted that it was ironic that here she was physically incapacitated writing about people who were so physically strong. Now, I think examples like Zamperini or Hildebrand help those less heroic in nature, at least me, I think, understand resilience, because these real-life examples make some more concrete sense out of resilience. Otherwise, we're left with abstract theories about it. I mean, psychology today defined resilience as that ineffable quality that allows some people to be knocked down by life and come back stronger than ever. Well, ineffable means not really able to be described in words. And psychology today goes on and describes it in like 2,000 words in their magazine. So maybe that's not the best way. But it did bring some wisdom to it, because they said sometimes resilience is seen as being mysterious or innate, when in fact resilience can be learned. It can be acquired. And part of that learning experience is going through the experience of suffering and fragility. And that's the real point I want to make today. I spoke about it last year, or maybe 2 years ago, in a talk called The Fragility of Goodness. But I think the challenge before us is to take the feeling broken and the suffering and transform it into being resilient, whether that's as individuals or as communities or as a country. So I'm going to turn to a couple of direct experiences I had with the issue of physical health and resiliency. Obviously, this arthritis over the last couple of years, where I found myself reduced by mobility, levels of pain increasing, and my sleep disrupted. I'm sure many of you have similar health challenges that test our resilience. Luckily, I did get hip replacement surgery, which is pretty routine these days, like getting your oil changed. And I had a great doctor and great nurses and great physical therapists that helped me feel better than I had for years. And I credit this not so much to me, but to the generic resilience of the human body. I think we often underestimate how resilient we can be as biological creatures. It's something that the Ethical Culture Society of Bergen County, New Jersey leader Joe Schumann talked about. He wrote an article in 2013 called Resilience, Humanism, and the Affirmation of Life. And he wrote about it after going through 5 orthopedic surgeries in 5 years, including hip replacement. He gave me a lot of sage advice when he was my mentor during my leadership training for ethical culture, but he also continues to give it and talk to me about hip replacement surgery. He experienced what he said was, quote, the capacity for restoration that evokes a quiet sense of gratitude. Thankfulness not for a God that watches over me, but for whatever natural forces there may be that work to return me to normalcy, health, and well-being. He said he could have easily felt sorry for himself as a victim of this issue, or he could have gone to the other extreme and just sort of, bared down and got through it. I mean, there's some positiveness to Winston Churchill's phrase, if you're going through hell, keep going. But he didn't want to be a victim, and he didn't want to just grit his teeth. He actually thought that focusing on resources and support available to him helped nurture gratitude and gave him therapeutic response to his situation. And it minimized for him the paralysis that can follow tragedy and suffering. There's a common paradox sometimes when we're suffering, in that when we're hurt, we often feel like the advice that other people give us doesn't help at all. We often retreat into sort of a self-centered hibernation. That's necessary for a while or at times, but over the long haul, quite often what we need most at those moments is to reach out to other people and in fact try to help them. The exact opposite of what we may be feeling. Joe said this in his article. He said, in life we often feel that the depleted self gains strength not through passively receiving what we feel we don't have, but actually by extending that capacity to others. If we find ourselves bereft of love or compassion, the trick is not to bemoan our fate and passively wait for these gifts to come our way, but to actively strive as best we can to extend these virtues that we sense we lack to others. Reaching outwardly strengthens us, and in so doing, nurturing our resilience. If you've been around ethnic culture enough, you might think that that sounds a bit like bringing out the best in others brings out the best in ourselves. Certainly it helped to do that in my life. One of the experiences I got Maureen's permission to talk about was her physical display of stamina. Of all the physically demanding parts of life, there are few so commonplace and awe-inspiring and necessary for the future of our species as childbirth. Now, maybe I'm biased, but I think my wife is quite an athlete. Admittedly, she's never been drawn to competitive athletics. She was a great sport enthusiast when she was yelling encouragement to our children as they participated in cross-country races. But the most forceful yelling I heard was doing 3 very intense experiences of labor, all without pain-killing medication. I was the birth coach, so there was an athletic connection there. But Maureen was the athlete in charge, riding each wave of intense contraction of, by the way, the largest muscle in the human body, the uterus. And she had the determination and stamina of an Olympic athlete. She recovered very well, even though at the very end of the first labor, when the child was almost born, a complication occurred. She had to get cesarean. But after that fact, 2 more children were born through natural childbirth without medication, indicating the incredible stamina of the human body, of nature. Like Joe and I, who received wonderful care by others, Maureen benefited from support. Our birth coach and our midwife, Mari, encouraged Maureen to bring out her best during this experience. And she shared a faith in Maureen that sometimes Maureen didn't have in herself in the middle of labor, because there were times where she worried whether she could carry on. It was so intense and so painful. And Mari would say, "You can do it, Maureen. You are doing it." That faith of a single person can make all the difference in bringing out resilience in each of us. In addition to that, sometimes the discomfort or pain that we're feeling can blind us to the greater good. And I've heard stories of women saying in the middle of labor, sometimes they forget why they're going through it. They forget that the baby's at the end of it. And sometimes you need people to remind you there is a purpose. It's important while you're suffering to keep your eyes on the prize. That helps with resilience. It takes a lot of resilience to birth a baby. It takes a lot of resilience to be a parent, for those of you who have. I'm going to take a side trip down another experience I had through the coming of age program at the Washington Ethical Society that my 3 children went through with my wife and I. There was an expression saying that describes what it's like to deal with a teenager, birthing a teenager, or birthing an adult. It can be that painful. We make all this fuss when a young baby comes into the world, but it can be as difficult to birth an adult. Realigning the relationships between parents and children was the focus of the Washington Ethical Society's Coming of Age program, and we valued it so much. All 3 of our children went through it. Our midwife's child, Emma, went through it with my youngest son, Justin, and they learned in that program about resilience. I served as director for a couple of years there, and in our pitch and our pamphlet, it talks about how we teach resilience and competence and self-reliance through things like ropes courses that can challenge you, or negotiation sessions with your parents that can be intimidating, or a night alone on a mountaintop as part of the Coming of Age program. And all the kids were pushed. One of those would push them particularly hard, but they all got back up and showed resilience. They were supported by a safe environment and by many adult mentors who talked to them about being knocked down in life and how to get back up again. But it wasn't just about the teen. It was also about the relationships between the teen and nature, the teen and greater society, and the teen and the parent. And the parents often were the ones that had the hardest time letting go, allowing their child to develop their own self to mature in a healthy manner. And the parents, including myself, had to learn resilience in letting go. Teens, children, they can show remarkable fortitude, but we don't always realize that. One of my greatest heroes, Jane Addams, wrote about, as a child herself, how she resented when adults would protect her overly. She said that it felt like she was being denied real experience. Often, so overprotective parents think they're doing what's right for the children, and really they have to let their children experience suffering on their own. Jane Addams wrote, even children, quote, wish to climb steep stairs and eat their bread with the tears. The bitterest of pain can be the flip side of the sweetness of existence. It's one reason why Jane Addams was strong enough to move into the poorest sections of the Chicago Halsted Street neighborhood and get involved in families with traumatic experiences in life. With care and compassion, she risked being broken by their stories because she was strong enough to realize she was resilient. She didn't want to numb herself to tragedy. And she shared that message as a lecturer in ethical culture at the Ethical Society of Chicago and other places. She spoke here. And she reflects, in a way, what I see as what's known as the ethics of care. The ethics of care is something in contemporary philosophy that's linked with feminism, but it focuses not on praising dry rationality and stoic duty or abstract logic, but instead on focusing on relational strengths. And relational strengths are, one, attentiveness, which is simply being open to the situation and the suffering of others. And another relational strength is responsibility, simply the willingness to try to make that situation better. And these qualities developed in Jane Addams a desire to connect with others even though their lives were fragile, because she would enter into that fragility. Now, I do remember that these caring habits, as I was a parent myself, helped me escape some of the parenting technique that somewhat my mother and father had, and many of you might have had parents who grew up in some old, sort of semi-repressive, old-school European culture where you were strict, where you denied the suffering, where you tried to increase your kids' stoicness. And my mother had a stern parenting style, focusing on rules and scolding and shame. She gave me a lot, but when we were very young, I remember being scolded. And I used that technique myself as a parent, working with my eldest son. There were times where he would have a tantrum, he could throw a doozy, and I'd try to have him have a timeout. And timeouts are fine, they're important as a parenting style, but I was using it as a way to try to maybe control or push him away or maybe even punish him to a degree. That's not what they're for. It might have been the time for me to be connecting with him rather than putting him in timeout. Both the parents and the children, I think, do better at sharing in life's difficult situations, sharing in fragility, and together developing resilience. This was a part of the coming of age program as well. That night alone on the mountain might have been the most difficult for some of the teens. We were at a Quaker camp in the Catoctin Mountains one night, and the team had just dropped all the kids off at their isolated campsites, individual campsites in the mountain. We had gotten down, and a storm started to brew. And there were soon buckets of rain and lightning strikes, and then tornado warnings. The camp headquarters at this camp had a weather radar that said there were these tornadoes spotted. After some very nervous minutes, it seemed like the tornadoes were past, and we realized it was safer to leave the teens on the mountain and go back up and try to take them off in the wind and the rain. And thankfully, most of them made it out dry. They all made it out. A couple were soaked. But during that night, what I saw was the resilience of the parents who were so worried for these fragile creatures that they had brought into the world. Letting go is sometimes more difficult than anything else. Most parents do have this roller coaster experience where they see their children being knocked down, and you want to rush and care for them, but sometimes you realize they have to get through it on their own, perhaps with some support, but not by sheltering. Whether a playground bully knocks them down, or a mean teacher, or goodness forbid, a hit-and-run driver. Being a parent, watching your child get knocked down is terribly painful and creates this incredible need to develop resilience. Children are tested. Humans are tested. I think the lesson that I draw from all of these elements are that it's important to accept suffering as a part of life, not to run towards it, but to realize that caring deeply can lead to suffering. I want to summarize some of the lessons that I draw from this potpourri of personal experiences with fragility and resilience before trying to apply them to the political situation today. So from Zamperini and Hillenbrand, personal health challenges, birthing, parenting, some of the lessons I draw was first, fragility does not necessarily indicate weakness. It can indicate a caring heart and a clear vision. Second, resilience is not so mysterious. It can be learned and developed. Third, resilience is enhanced often by the support of another person or a whole community. Fourth, remembering a greater good can help get through the suffering. Fifth, we're more resilient than we realize. Nature is more resilient, and we have to tap those resources. And finally, letting go is sometimes a part of resilience. So, which can we apply to the current political situation? Certainly one is that we're not going to save this world by ourselves. Our current political crisis is going to require us to reach out to others. In his second inaugural address, President Obama shared some of this. He said, "This generation of Americans have been tested by crises and steeled by our resolve and proved by our resilience. A decade of war is now past and economic recovery has become. America's possibilities are limitless, for we possess all the qualities that this world without boundaries requires. Youth and drive, diversity and openness, an endless capacity for risk, and a gift for reinvention. My fellow Americans, we are made for this moment, and we will seize it so long as we seize it together." That unity is being challenged today. 4 years later, maybe that speech sounds a little bit too feel good, right? But more and more research is showing that social structures are resilient when they rely on relationships, when they rely on a network of support and collaboration. I found the U.S. Institute of Peace has a program that they describe in an article by Lauren Van Metre, who is a resiliency expert, and that's a field of study in international affairs and social development. And she talks about what she calls associative relationships being the key to stopping violence and retribution. She studied, along with this group, Kenya, India, Iraq, and she showed in situations where crises hit, resiliency came about when people had strong associations, when trust was built up through community associations like businesses and clubs, and they were more stable and able to survive these crises. In fact, the Fragility Support Group within the U.S. Institute of Peace studied how the U.S. could support fragile states, and they focused on government inclusivity, inspiring horizontal cohesion across society. They said that for a government to survive crises, you have to have not just a social contract, but a whole set, a network, a, quote, complex set of interactions and associations that act as an immune system to internal and external stress and shock. So the best I think we have today to do is to create these networks again. We've become an isolated nation over the last 30, 40 years. We need to weave more connections with other organizations, not fewer. We have to continue to protest, but also reaching out to other people and other groups that are different than us and creating the dialogue and the network of inclusivity that helps build associations. I think the Philadelphia Ethical Society, for example, should get more involved in power in our interfaith organization working in social justice. I think we should get more connected with other churches and synagogues and mosques around the city and the region. We have to get more connected with other nonprofit groups working in social justice, not less, not to retreat into fear and individualism. Abby Shearer, who is a member of the Brooklyn Ethical Society, worked for years in social justice issues. She talked to me about how important things like cooperatives, co-ops, banks, that increased social network are to social cohesion and long-term relationships. And she says when we have economies that are based on cooperatives where people care about their neighborhoods and reinvest locally and know each other as human beings, global crises don't upset those communities as much. They're stronger than that. 3 of our guests during last year's big public education effort, Capitalism and Crisis, echoed these elements. Jamie Gauthier of the Sustainable Business Network, Chris Robb, State Representative, Professor Lynn Anderson, all focused on how grassroots cooperation is fundamental to economic growth in this century. Localism, building networks. The government needs to reach out into the society and reconnect as well. John Krzema, who was another guest of Capitalism and Crisis, who wrote the book Think Like a Woman, Improve the World, vis-a-vis Christians' month of March focus, said what might be the most contentious but intriguing point I want to make today is he claimed that in fact women and people that think like women are more resilient. His study focused on qualities associated with femininity like compassion, relationship, connection, actually helped organizations and businesses and societies survive the ups and downs of the 21st century. If you saw Michael Moore's film, Where to Invade Next, that we showed last month, that focused on it. Near the end of the film, if you'll remember, they focused on Iceland. This is a country of less than 500,000 people. They survived the 2008 global economic collapse primarily because some female leaders in that country stepped up to regain public trust and emphasize the network of cooperation. They focused on rebuilding public trust and jettisoning what was this testosterone-driven male leadership that led to the financial collapse, that focused on risk-taking rather than long-term relationships and connection. They even sent some financial hucksters to jail. What a concept. Moore in the film speculated that perhaps the world would be more peaceful and just if women were in charge. And I think there's a connection to the acceptance of fragility, the connection to natural forces that do give women a step up, or people think like women. And I think we have to work on increasing gender equity in all of our positions. I mean, we think that we made it and sexism is on retreat. Only a fifth of our legislators are women. Less than 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. So I think we have to work on developing resiliency by, first of all, opening up new ways of thinking, and that increasingly means increasing access to power for women, for marginalized communities that think differently than us. You can teach resiliency. It can be learned. Teach it in our schools. Teach it to young women so that past 2018, when we're all going to go out there voting, we're going to have more female leaderships and positions of power that understand that fragility and compassion and networking is what builds a resilient society. Psychology Today said that quite often understanding that failure is a form of helpful feedback is a part of resiliency. Well, have we turned the election around? Do we see this as helpful feedback? If the election of Trump has proved anything to us, it's proved that we can change direction like this. We had whiplash in November. It can be turned around again. Changing direction is what we need to do. The ability to do this through seizing adaptive leadership to demonstrating a point of leadership potential that this Peace Institute study says, quote, that many young leaders, female and male, clearly assess risk, engage constituents inclusively, organize collectively in response to shocks. Young people who are marching, who are voicing their concerns on social media, are trying to build a network at the grassroots level that is not a hierarchical top-down format. I think people in my generation are still struggling to understand how we can re-envision a world where that flexibility and resilience and idealism is powerful. We cannot certainly retreat into paralysis and cynicism. And you can become paralyzed, like when health concerns or when death occurs in a community, we can sink back. But we have to, as a nation, look beyond the pain that we're feeling socially. The guy who founded this movement, Felix Adler, said, perspective pain is the Medusa, the Greek myth. Perspective pain is the Medusa. Whoever looks at her becomes like her. The blood freezes in his veins. He is turned to stone. We look into the face and are petrified. The reason is we think of the pain and we do not look beyond the pain. It's time this country looks beyond the pain, acts to build a better world. Whether it was Louis Zamperini, and he couldn't run when he was in that life raft. He couldn't run when he was a prisoner of war, but his mind kept working. He looked beyond the pain. He looked to help his fellow prisoners. He looked to getting out of the concentration camp and back at home. Focusing our energies on what's beyond the suffering is probably the most important element to coming together as a community and building a world that we believe in, showing ourselves to be more resilient than we could ever believe we could be. Thank you for joining me in that effort.